73-year-old George Thompson, despite having a heart attack, was turned away by hospital director Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell because he couldn't pay. But when she learned who the man standing beside him was, that director's face went pale and her career ended, because what happened that day brought all of Britain to its feet. In the heart of London, on the south bank of the Thames River, among the magnificent examples of Victorian architecture, St. Catherine's Private Hospital stood as one of the city's most prestigious private healthcare institutions. Founded in 1871, this hospital had a 150-year history and served only Britain's wealthiest families. With consultation fees of £500 per hour, this institution maintained a strict policy of never accepting ordinary people. The hospital's interior architecture symbolized privilege itself. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, corridors decorated with Italian art pieces. Each VIP room resembled luxury hotel suites, with meals served by Michelin-starred chefs. This wasn't just a hospital, it was a status symbol for the wealthy. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, 52 years old, was one of Cambridge Medical School's most successful graduates. She was a woman with short, sharp features, always wearing perfect suits and never smiling warmly. For 10 years, she had served as both chief physician and general manager of St. Catherine's. During this time, she had managed the hospital more like a profit-focused business than a healthcare institution, increasing annual revenue by 300%.
Hartwell's office was a space that reflected her power within the hospital. The corner office on the third floor overlooked London's panoramic view. The walls displayed her diplomas from Cambridge, awards from the Royal College of Physicians, and photographs with wealthy patients. Her desk always held financial statements, profit-loss calculations, and hospital expansion projects. There were reasons why Hartwell was so rigid. She came from a working-class family in Yorkshire. Her father was a miner, her mother a housewife. Throughout her childhood, she had experienced financial hardship and studied on scholarships. During her years at Cambridge, she had always felt excluded among her wealthy classmates. These experiences had driven her both to become very successful and to reject her past by creating a new identity, eventually becoming someone who discriminated herself. That Thursday was a cold and rainy October afternoon. The usual calm atmosphere prevailed at St. Catherine's. While wealthy patients with private insurance were being treated in VIP rooms, even the emergency department had an appointment system and advance payment requirement. This system had been designed by Dr. Hartwell to protect the hospital from unwanted patients. Emergency Department Supervisor Janet Mills, a nurse with 15 years of experience, was a woman who generally enjoyed quiet shifts and adhered strictly to procedures. At 45, she had started in the NHS, but moved to the private sector for higher pay. Although she secretly missed the working philosophy of the NHS, she was obligated to follow St. Catherine's rules.
As exactly 14:30, unexpected activity began at the hospital entrance. When the automatic glass doors opened, 73-year-old George Thompson staggered into the emergency department, clutching his chest tightly. George, a retired mathematics teacher, was a large, white-haired, friendly-faced man. But at that moment, his face was pale as a sheet, cold sweat was pouring from his forehead, and he was clearly in great pain. George's life story was that of a typical British middle class. For 45 years, he had taught mathematics in various state schools in London, touching the lives of thousands of children. He had a happy 50-year marriage with his wife Mary. When both began experiencing health problems, they became unable to afford private insurance premiums and had to rely on the NHS. For the past 6 months, George had been experiencing increasing chest pains. He had applied to his GP requesting a cardiologist appointment, but due to NHS waiting times, His appointment had been scheduled for 4 months later. That day, his pain had become so severe that he could no longer bear it. Beside George was a middle-aged man he knew as his neighbor. This man had found George collapsed on his floor, clutching his chest, and had immediately brought him to the hospital without hesitation. This neighbor, who felt genuine concern for George, was Keir Starmer, but he hadn't yet revealed his identity. Starmer had stopped by home between Westminster meetings that day, and seeing his neighbor's condition, had immediately rushed to help.
Emergency nurse Janet Mills immediately recognized the seriousness of George's condition when she first saw him. Her 25 years of nursing experience had taught her to immediately recognize heart attack symptoms. The elderly man was breathless, his face pale and sweaty. He was holding his left arm, and he was clearly showing signs of cardiac distress. But St. Catherine's ironclad procedures were strict and unchangeable. First insurance verification, advance payment collection, then treatment. Janet felt internal discomfort, but rules were rules. She couldn't risk losing her job. "Sir, your name?" Janet asked in preparing forms, continuing to observe George's condition. "George Thompson," the elderly man said, breathless, each word causing him difficulty. "Which company is your private insurance with? May I have your policy number?" George's face fell, his hope extinguished. "I'm an NHS patient. I don't have private insurance. I'm a retired teacher." Janet's facial expression immediately changed. This was a major problem for St. Catherine's. She had clear instructions for NHS patients. Rejection. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but this is a private hospital. We don't accept NHS patients. The nearest NHS hospital is Queen Elizabeth Hospital." Keir Starmer had been waiting calmly until that moment, analyzing the situation. But upon hearing these words, he intervened with astonishment. "Excuse me, but this man is in an emergency situation. He may be having a heart attack. Isn't this a medical emergency?" Janet hesitated because what Starmer said was true, but the rules were very clear. "Thank you for your understanding, sir, but we have hospital rules. We don't serve NHS patients. Queen Elizabeth Hospital is only 45 minutes away."
45 minutes? Starmer's voice rose. This man could be having a heart attack right now. What happens if he waits 45 minutes? Sir, please lower your voice. You can call an ambulance. Calling an ambulance takes 20 minutes too. This man will wait more than an hour total. Janet was really in a difficult position. George's condition did look genuinely serious, his breathing becoming increasingly labored, but breaking the rules could harm both her job and the hospital. "I need to speak with my director," she said, and immediately called Dr. Hartwell. "Dr. Hartwell, we have a situation in emergency. Elderly NHS patient showing signs of heart problems. His companion insists we treat him." Hartwell's voice was cold and decisive. "Janet, you know the procedure. We don't accept NHS patients. Direct him to Queen Elizabeth." "But doctor, the situation looks really serious." "Janet, we won't discuss this. The rules are clear. I'm coming immediately." When Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell came from her office to the emergency department, she quickly assessed the situation. The scene she saw was familiar. An elderly, sick, and clearly impoverished NHS patient. The man beside him was also ordinary, not wearing expensive clothes, carrying no status symbols. Her approach to such situations had become automatic over the years. "Mr. Thompson," said Hartwell, showing no empathy, with clinical coldness, "I understand your situation and apologize for any inconvenience. However, only patients with private insurance are treated here. The most suitable and nearest NHS hospital for you is Queen Elizabeth Hospital." George Thompson's breathing was becoming increasingly labored. He was now struggling even to speak. "Doctor, please, so much pain. I think it's my heart." "Mr. Thompson, this medical condition requires immediate intervention," said Starmer, now reaching the limit of his patience. "This man is having a heart attack. Minutes matter."
Hartwell approached Starmer with great authority and superiority, answering him with a condescending attitude. "Sir, are you a doctor? Have you received medical training? If not, you have no right to question my medical assessment." I'm not a doctor, but I have human conscience. This man is dying and you're being indifferent to his pain. I'm not approaching emotionally, I'm approaching medically. The man appears to be in stable condition. You can call an ambulance, they'll take him to Queen Elizabeth. Starmer was now trembling with anger. Calling an ambulance takes 20 minutes. Getting to Queen Elizabeth takes 45 minutes. This man will wait at least an hour. An hour during a heart attack means life-threatening danger. Hartwell shrugged indifferently. This isn't our hospital's problem. It's an NHS organizational issue. We're a private hospital. We serve private patients. Just then, George Thompson leaned forward in the waiting chair in the corridor and collapsed, about to faint. His left hand was clutching his chest. His face had turned a gray color. Starmer immediately rushed to his side, checking his pulse. The pulse was very weak, irregular, and intermittent. George's breathing was coming very shallowly. "This man will die if he doesn't receive immediate intervention," Starmer shouted, this time loud enough for the entire emergency department to hear. Other nurses in the emergency department had also noticed the situation and approached with concern. Janet Mills's face showed worry because George's condition was genuinely deteriorating. But Hartwell was completely unaffected. Commercial calculations were running through her mind. Accepting NHS patients could cause other NHS patients to come, potentially damaging the hospital's image. "Media exaggeration," she said coldly. "The man is a bit uncomfortable. There are NHS hospitals for this. He doesn't meet our hospital standards." These words were the last straw for Starmer. There was no longer any need to be diplomatic. He took out his phone and called 999. "Emergency services, yes, I'm at St. Catherine's Private Hospital. There's a patient here having a heart attack and the hospital director is refusing to treat him." The operator on the phone asked in astonishment, "Sir, is the hospital refusing treatment? Isn't the hospital accepting patients in emergency situations?"
Yes, they're not accepting him because the patient has NHS insurance. This isn't legal, sir. All hospitals are required to intervene in emergency situations." Hearing this conversation, Hartwell began to panic. The situation was escalating to official channels. "What are you doing? You're dragging this hospital into scandal." "No," said Starmer resolutely. "I'm trying to save a human life. And if this is a scandal, the scandal is your behavior." 5 minutes later, a yellow-green NHS ambulance arrived at the hospital. The paramedics, led by experienced team leader Mike Rodriguez, immediately rushed to George and began initial intervention. "This man shows signs of acute myocardial infarction," said Rodriguez after connecting the EKG device. "ST elevation is visible. Immediate catheterization is needed. Why is he still here?" Janet Mills explained the situation. "We didn't accept him because he's an NHS patient." Rodriguez looked at Hartwell in astonishment. "Doctor, this is an emergency. You're legally required to intervene." Hartwell's face had turned ashen. The situation had now entered official records, and the paramedics would report everything. I was implementing hospital rules," she said defensively. "Doctor," said Rodriguez sternly, "these rules aren't more important than human life. If this man had been treated 20 minutes ago, the heart muscle damage would have been minimal." Starmer followed George to Queen Elizabeth Hospital with the ambulance. On the way, George lost consciousness once more, but was stabilized by the paramedics' intervention. At Queen Elizabeth, George was taken to the emergency cardiac catheterization unit. Experienced cardiologist Dr. Patricia Ahmed performed angioplasty to open the blocked coronary artery and inserted a stent. The operation was successful, and George's life-threatening condition was overcome. While waiting in the hospital corridor, Starmer reflected on what had happened. This situation George Thompson had experienced was a perfect but painful example of healthcare inequality in Britain. NHS patients were treated as second-class citizens, their lives considered worthless by private hospitals. After the surgery, Dr. Ahmed spoke with Starmer. "Mr. Thompson is very lucky. If it had been delayed another hour, he could have lost a large portion of his heart muscle. Who caused such a delay? When Starmer told her what had happened, Dr. Ahmed was both angry and surprised. This is completely unethical. St. Catherine's violated both medical and legal rules with this behavior. The next day, Starmer brought up what he had experienced at Westminster. But the real bombshell exploded in the evening news. Sky News reporter Sarah Mitchell announced in front of cameras that she would deliver major news. Tonight, a striking incident regarding healthcare inequality in Britain's health system was captured on camera. Yesterday, at St. Catherine's Private Hospital, an NHS patient was refused treatment by the hospital director despite having a heart attack. And the sole witness to this scandal was Labour Party leader Keir Starmer. The news continued with interviews with George Thompson both at the hospital and at home. George, standing by his bedside, said emotionally to the cameras, "I served this country for 45 years. As a mathematics teacher, I raised thousands of children. I paid taxes for 45 years, never missed my NHS contributions. But when I had a heart attack, just because I didn't have private insurance, that hospital treated me like a dog. If Keir Starmer hadn't been there, I would have died in that cold corridor." George's wife, Mary, also joined the interview. "In our 45-year marriage, I had never seen my husband so frightened. He felt like a criminal in that hospital." The hashtag George Thompson began trending on social media. People started sharing their similar experiences. Stories of discrimination faced by NHS patients in private hospitals emerged one by one. Thousands of comments came on Twitter. "My father experienced the same situation. The private hospital turned him away. Is being an NHS patient a crime now? If you don't have money in this country, do you deserve to die?" Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell experienced real shock that evening while watching television in her luxurious Kensington home. Her own hospital was being criticized in main news bulletins, and she was being called a heartless director and money-focused doctor. A more detailed analysis was done on ITV News. Health experts stated that St. Catherine's behavior was problematic, both ethically and legally. Professor James Watson, a health policy expert from Imperial College London, said to the cameras, "This incident shows the ugliest face of healthcare inequality in Britain. Private hospitals operate for profit, but this cannot be more important than human life in emergency situations." The phone started ringing. The first caller was Hospital Board Chairman Lord William Ashford. At 70, from an aristocratic family background, he was a very influential businessman. "Elizabeth, what is this disgrace? All media is talking about us. BBC, ITV, Sky News, everywhere our hospital's name is mentioned with scandal. William, I just implemented hospital rules, the rules you established. What rules? Turning away someone who's dying? We live in Britain, not the Middle Ages. The man was an NHS patient. We have a specific policy. You know it too. I don't care about your policy. This scandal has destroyed our hospital's 150-year reputation. Tomorrow, when the stock market opens, our shares will fall." The next morning, things had gotten even worse. When Dr. Hartwell arrived at the hospital, dozens of journalists were waiting at the door. "Dr. Hartwell, what do you have to say about your treatment of George Thompson? If the patient had died, who would you hold responsible? Aren't NHS patients human to you? Will St. Catherine's policies change?"
Hartwell rushed into the hospital under security guard protection without answering the questions. Going up in the elevator, she noticed her hands were shaking. In her office, the board of directors had called an emergency meeting with all members. Lord Ashford and the other 7 members had united against Hartwell. "Elizabeth," said Lord Ashford without any emotion,
This scandal has affected not only our hospital's reputation, but also its financial situation. Since yesterday evening, 15 private insurance companies have notified us that they will review their agreements with us. But Silence. Boycott calls are being made against the hospital on social media. The hashtag Boycott St. Catherine's is trending. 30% of our private patient reservations have been canceled. Hartwell's world was collapsing. Her obsession with managing the hospital profit-focused had ultimately caused the greatest damage. As the board of directors, we have unanimously made our decision, said Lord Ashford in a cold voice. We want your resignation. This isn't fair. I just implemented hospital policies you approved. We will urgently change those policies. From now on, St. Catherine's will also accept NHS patients in emergency situations. You are no longer at this hospital. That evening, Dr. Hartwell watched Keir Starmer's speech in Parliament on television. What George Thompson experienced is the most dramatic and shameful example of healthcare inequality in Britain. An NHS citizen, despite having a heart attack, is denied treatment because of money. This is unacceptable in 21st century Britain. Starmer's voice echoed in Parliament. No person in this country should lose their right to life based on the amount of money in their pocket. Every NHS citizen should have the right to receive service from private hospitals in emergency situations.
That's why, said Starmer with his strong voice, we are launching the Healthcare for All campaign today. From now on, no hospital, no doctor in Britain will intervene in emergency situations without looking at patient insurance type. The campaign details were prohibition of insurance discrimination in emergency situations, NHS quota requirement for private hospitals, strengthening of patient rights law, heavy financial penalties and license revocation for health discrimination, mandatory patient rights education in all hospitals. A week later, news of Dr. Hartwell's resignation appeared on the front pages of all newspapers. The Guardian, Heartless Doctor resigns. The Times, resignation after St. Catherine's scandal. Daily Mail, doctor who rejected NHS patient fired were the headlines. Dr. Hartwell was replaced by experienced Dr. Michael Reynolds, who had worked at Queen Elizabeth Hospital for 25 years in the NHS. Dr. Reynolds fundamentally changed hospital policies on his first day. St. Catherine's will now serve all patients in emergency situations. We will not discriminate between NHS patients and privately insured patients. This hospital has served with a healing mission for 150 years, and we will return to this mission. George Thompson, after his complete recovery, visited Starmer with Mary. An emotional meeting took place in the Westminster office. Keir, said George, holding his hands, what you did for me that day didn't just save my life. You gave hope to thousands of people. You changed the system. Mary also joined. In our 45-year marriage, I had never seen George so grateful. You didn't just give him a chance to live, you gave him back his dignity.
George, Mary, said Starmer, I just did what was right. You are the real heroes. George's story, the experience he courageously shared, changed the system. 3 months later, the Healthcare for All law passed Parliament with 347 votes in favor and 89 against. Even 23 MPs from the Conservative Party had supported the law. From now on, no hospital in Britain could look at patient insurance type or refuse them in emergency situations. After the law came into effect, Dr. Hartwell began working at a small-town clinic in the Cotswolds. Her salary was 1/10 of her salary at St. Catherine's, but for the first time, she felt like she was practicing real medicine. On her first day, Albert Williams, a 67-year-old farmer, came with chest pains. The man had NHS insurance and was worried. "Doctor, I'm not privately insured. I'm an NHS patient. Will you examine me?" This time, Hartwell intervened without any hesitation. She thought of what George Thompson had experienced. "Albert, don't worry at all.
Get the EKG immediately. This is an emergency. Your insurance type doesn't matter at all. What matters is your health." Albert's eyes filled with tears. "Really, doctor? My previous doctor always turned me away because I didn't have insurance." "Albert," said Hartwell, this time with a genuine smile, "the only thing that matters here is my patient's recovery. You are my patient, period." On her way home that night, Hartwell reflected on the change she had experienced. The George Thompson incident hadn't just cost her her job, it had also reminded her of the reason for becoming a doctor and being human. Now she saw patients not with money, but with their pain. 6 months later, the first results of the Healthcare for All law were announced. Emergency services provided to NHS patients in private hospitals across Britain had increased by 400%. No patient had been refused emergency intervention due to insurance type. A year later, Starmer and George came together again, this time at St. Catherine's Hospital, at the new management's promotional event. The hospital had completely changed. There was a large sign at the entrance, "Welcome all patients." Dr. Reynolds announced his new policies. St. Catherine's is now an institution that doesn't discriminate based on insurance in emergency situations and keeps its doors open to all patients. What George Thompson experienced will never be repeated. George turned to Starmer. "Keir, that day, you didn't just take me to the hospital, you changed the entire system, saved millions of lives." "George, the real change happened with your courage. You shared your story, people empathized with you, they took action." The Healthcare for All campaign had become an international model. Canada, Australia, Ireland, and France had passed similar laws, following Britain's example. The World Health Organization described the campaign as the most successful health justice reform of the 21st century. Dr. Hartwell served thousands of patients during the 2 years she worked at the town clinic. And every time she served an NHS patient, she remembered George Thompson and reinforced the lesson she had learned from that day. She had now become a doctor who fought for her patients and stood by them. 2 years later, Hartwell received an unexpected offer. She had received an offer to work in the NHS system from Queen Elizabeth Hospital. It was 1/3 of her private sector salary, but she accepted. "Why do you want to work in the NHS?" asked Director Dr. Patricia Ahmed.
Because the NHS means real medicine. Patients come with their needs, not with their money. George Thompson taught me that. Finally, on the nationally televised Healthcare Heroes program, George Thompson, Keir Starmer, and Dr. Michael Reynolds came together. The program was broadcast live from St. Catherine's new emergency department. Host Victoria Barnes asked, "Mr. Thompson, how did what you experienced that day change your life?" George smiled. "It didn't just change my life, it changed the country's understanding of health. Now, no patient in Britain will be turned away from the door because they don't have money. This is a great victory, not just for me, but for millions of NHS patients." Mr. Starmer, how do you remember that day? That day taught me what real leadership is. Leadership is standing with the weak, not with the strong. What George experienced showed the greatest injustice in the system. Dr. Reynolds, what has changed at St. Catherine's? Everything has changed. Now we look at illness here, not at pockets. In the last year, we've treated 8,000 emergency patients, 40% of whom were NHS insured. What George Thompson experienced will never happen here again. At the end of the program, Dr. Hartwell joined by phone connection live on air. Connecting from her clinic in the Cotswolds, Hartwell made an emotional speech.
"I owe George Thompson an apology. That day, I ignored my duty to be human, to be a doctor. But thanks to the lesson I learned from that day, I'm now a real doctor. I started working in the NHS, and I remember George every day. George addressed Hartwell from the screen. "Dr. Hartwell, we can all make mistakes. What's important is learning from our mistakes. You accomplished that." At the end of the program, St. Catherine's Hospital statistics appeared on screen. 15,000 NHS patients treated in the last 2 years. Patient satisfaction rose to 95%. 0% insurance discrimination in emergency department. Staff satisfaction increased by 40%. This story shows us that sometimes life's greatest changes arise from the most painful moments. The discrimination George Thompson experienced had created a revolution in Britain's health system. Even Dr. Hartwell had learned to become a better doctor after that painful experience. True justice is seeing everyone as having the same human value. And sometimes the crisis caused by a heart attack can change the heart of an entire system. George Thompson's story isn't just a patient's story, it's the story of Britain's conscience awakening.